The unsurpassed, penetrating, and perfect truth is seldom met with, even in 100,000 myriad kalpas. Now we can see and hear it. We can remember and accept it. I vow to make the Buddha's truth one with myself. I'm going to be talking about what it means to train with a bright heart. And this is something that actually came up for me several weeks ago because it became important that I work on it and not give in to my moods and states of mind and emotions and stuff like that. So when I was thinking about the topic for this talk, I decided that that's what I would talk about. It's really helpful to talk about what you're actually working on at the time. And I was giving meditation instruction last weekend to the introductory retreatants, and on my notes it says, meditate with a bright and alert mind. And I thought, do people really know what this means? I tried to explain it a little bit, but I don't know if it came across. So that's what I'd like to talk about today, and from my own experience, what it means to me anyway. I'd like to start with what Rev. Master Jiyu wrote in The Wild White Goose when she was a new monk there. And she was talking to one of the older monks, very venerable monk, and one of her teachers was there with her, helping with the translation, and he had just adjusted her back so she wasn't having back pain. And then he was helping her with what to do with her mind. And so this is what she wrote. He wrote a lot of things on the paper, but Reverend Hajime seemed to have some trouble in working out their English meaning. In the end, Reverend Sansaburo grabbed the dictionary and hunted in it. Presently he found what he was looking for and handed it to me. I studied it. The word he was showing me was right. I nodded, but he was not satisfied. First he pointed to the left, shaking his head, then to the right, and nodded. Not left, I said, only right. I looked hard at Reverend Hajime. Not exactly, said Reverend Hajime. Next, Reverend Sansaburo pointed at the floor, shaking his head, and then at the ceiling, nodding. Up, not down, I wrote, but Reverend Hajime seemed to be mentally scratching his head and gave me no help. One way, I asked. Like water, wrote Reverend Sansaburo. Water only flows one way, I said, and he nodded happily and wrote, Gyate, gyate, hara gyate. Gone, I asked. No, cried Reverend Hajime, and then wrote, going, going, always going, like water. He then added as an afterthought, water bright. Reverend Sansaburo seemed to have become galvanized by something and uttered the first word of English I had ever heard him speak. Bright, he cried. He had obviously found several words at once. Mind bright, not dull. Bright, bright. I sat still for a few minutes, thinking hard. Then I took the dictionary and found the Japanese for positive and negative and wrote the following. The mind must always be bright when meditating, always positive and never negative, looking upwards and not downwards, always flowing on and clinging to nothing, just as water flows. Reverend Hajime read it carefully and translated it into better Japanese, for the other one could make no sense out of my attempt. Reverend Sansaburo nodded in obvious delight and wrote, Good for the beginning, later nothing at all, but in the beginning there must be brightness and flow, with no holding on. When brightness becomes usual, one does not notice even brightness. Then what I decided a little while ago was right, I wrote. I must take everything that happens as for my own good, whatever it may be. Reverend Hajime nodded. Always you must believe that everyone has good heart for you. He wrote in his atrocious English, if you do not do so, you never become peaceful at all. Buddha must be seen in all things. Reverend Sansambaro was writing busily, and Reverend Hajime translated. The attitude of mind is just as important as the position of the body when you meditate. If the mind is not right, the meditation will be useless. Zen teaching is to just sit, but it is more than just sitting, and yet it is just sitting. Wandering thoughts are like pain in the legs. If the mind is right in its attitude, thoughts pass as traffic on a bridge, and we watch from beneath the bridge without being involved in the traffic. If the attitude of body is right, the pain in the legs and other places passes in the same way, and neither our body nor our mind is disturbed. So I would say that's the ideal, letting our thoughts go, letting our thoughts come and go without getting involved in them. Being bright is what there is under all the crud. We don't have to manufacture brightness. We just need to do this training. And what I found that is so important, that I realized in when I first started working on brightness, was right effort, was making an effort. You can't just, you can't just sink into your grumpiness, or sink into your despair, or sink into your frustration or whatever, which can be the tendency and can be what we habitually do or what we have habitually done. But those of us who have been training for a while know that that leads nowhere. And I think for me, it's making the effort to do the practice. And doing the practice has several aspects here which have come up for me during this time. And one of them is, for me, false cheer doesn't work. I've tried it. It just doesn't feel quite so right. It's not touching on the true brightness or our true nature at all. The brightness is there even though we don't see it. And what I have found is that if you're feeling depressed or despair or whatever is going on, there's a tendency, if it's strong, to think that this is all there is, and just kind of sink into it. But the training is to just be with that. Not try and be bright, which is what I would like to do, is find a way to get rid of that kind of awful feeling. And in fact, yesterday when I was spending most of my time preparing this class, this talk, I was full of despair. And it's very interesting how things sometimes work. And I just had to use all my faith to not believe in it, and to know that I have known something else, and that's not the true reality. But I couldn't get away from it. I just had to look at it and just be with it. And I actually went to this book I have about emotions, and it talked about despair and depression and grief. And it talked about despair, and I think depression as well, as not looking at the grief or not looking at the anger that is maybe within us. So I decided to just be with the despair. I mean, what could I do, really? And there was stuff underneath it. And I just had to keep up my faith that this will pass. This is not the true reality. This will pass. And there we are today. It's past. So, but there's still a nickel in there. And I think it's just old karma or old ways of dealing with things. And so I just have to keep trusting and training and actually looking up. Now, what does this mean? And what I discovered was some simple things, which one was the way you walk. I was noticing that sometimes the way I walk is very slow and kind of hunched over. And I thought, well, this isn't a very bright attitude. And I found that just standing upright and walking a bit faster helped with the brightness. It just was the way I held my body. And I think this is why we meditate sitting upright and not kind of slouched over, because that helps us to stay bright. This is the brightness of the body. And there were some other things I noticed about that, but I can't think of them right now. Let me look at this. Another thing I have been taught about the feelings and how you feel is, and how what's going on with you, is that although you can't necessarily make them go away or cover them up, and we don't want to do that necessarily, you don't have to focus so much on them. I remember when I was a young monk and I was suffering very deeply, and Reverend Master Daisui told me, and I don't know if it was coming from Reverend Master Jiyu or from himself, that what will really help you with this heavy karma is generosity and being kind to other people. And at that point in my training, I was fairly new. I thought, well, I don't want to be kind to other people. I don't want to be generous. I'm miserable. I want to be happy. I want to, I'm sure when I'm happy, I'll be nice to people. But, but the training works, and over the years, I've seen that it really helps. And also, the selfishness is gradually converted into compassion for others. And it was actually being made the guest master that helped me to really change as far as focusing on myself and being compassionate to others, because just somehow seeing people come in the door, come in the gate, there was just a natural, it just seemed to arise naturally that these people are coming here for help, and I have to see how it is that I can help them. So that was kind of a real opening for me to compassion. So now, sometimes if I get too focused on my own difficulties, I just say, okay, let that go, and just do the practice, do the training, do the next thing, be willing. The other day I was, Reverend Margaret was away, so I was the acting prior, and I had so much to do, and I became terribly anxious. And I was in the kitchen, and Reverend Valor needed help in the kitchen, and I racked my brain for anyone I could call, but I couldn't think of anyone. So I offered to help. And within minutes, my anxiety left. And I think it was because I had touched on something deeper. The willingness to just trust and let go and do what needed to be done at that moment. And it turned out that things didn't take as long in the kitchen, and something else I needed to do didn't take as long, and I was able to get things done that I needed to. So that was a real teaching. Just maybe instead of listening to your grumpiness or your negativity or your despair, to just listen to something deeper and do what needs to be done, even though something in you may be saying, I don't have time, or I don't want to, or I'd rather be doing something else. It's just the doing of that, doing of the next thing that needs to be done, that helps us be in tune with our true nature, where the true brightness is. And anyway, that's the end of that. Now, again, right effort, not necessarily, effort, making an effort really seemed to come up for me, because all during this time I could see my tendencies, my old habits, the ways that I would like just to, fall into my old habits. And at every time I had to make the right effort. And this doesn't always work. I don't always make an effort. But I am seeing that that's the only way to go. Because I think basically we want to be in tune with that which is bright. And we want to be in tune with our true nature. That's what we long for. And that's what is calling us. And so we just have to continually work on trusting in that and making the effort, and trusting in what our meditation has been telling us, trusting in the brightness that we have seen from time to time. And during this ceremony, since we were celebrating Kazan, Great Master Kazan, what came up for me was the effort that he had to make. He had had a terrible temper, and he had to make the effort to overcome that. And it turns out that in making that effort, he was thought of as a very gentle, compassionate, warm-hearted person who got along with everyone. That's what they say. You never know. But anyway, he was very generous and giving and loving, and helped to spread Soto Zen throughout Japan. So I also was noticing during the ceremony I had a very critical mind. It was just going on and on and on, and I thought, yes, making a right effort. This training is not easy, and we have to make the effort to continually work on ourselves to the best of our ability. That's what will break through the karma and lead us to where we long to go. So I happened to look at Reverend Master Koten's little booklet called The 5 Diamond Points, and this was a transcription of Dharma talks that he gave up in Canada. And at the beginning, there's a summary of the 5 points. And these kind of point to what I have been working on and what I wanted to talk about today. So I'm going to read them. It's not too long, but I think it's very helpful. I really like this. The first one is the keeping of the pure and bright mind. This is sometimes called the first mind in the initial stages of training. But it is not in all aspects the same as at the beginning. Reverend Master Hario, the present head of the order, very much exemplifies this. When, at an advisory council meeting, if things get overclouded and confused by people being overwhelmed by the opinions and views which they are continually subjected to by the external world, it is as if he takes out a vajra that is kept polished and golden and bright and reminds us what the essential matter is. In the beginning, we look with great sincerity, even though we do not always recognize it, and we go at the problem, the koan as it were, with great determination and a certain amount of naivety. a certain amount of putting everything else aside in order to concentrate on the training and finding the truth. It is easy as one goes on throughout the years to become discouraged or to become overwhelmed by the ideas and views and opinions of the world, which can cause one to feel tired and to feel that the way is obscured. Dogen says, it is very difficult to keep the initial humility to the very end, but he says it is absolutely essential to do so. The merit of first mind is the most widest and completely fathomless. Even if Buddhas explain it fully, such explanation can never be enough. The second diamond point is when despair and discouragement accumulate, as it were, in our kidneys, the seat of the will. When they accumulate, when the ideas and opinions and views get in the way and we feel stodgy and unable to move, when we feel as if the water of the Spirit is bunged up inside of us, then it is necessary to grasp hold of the will and turn. It is necessary to raise the water of the Spirit from the base of the spine up, as if one were grasping something and deliberately turning it. This is done through the positive use of the will, through deliberately, even when one does not feel like it. And that's an important point. Even when one does not feel like it, especially when one does not feel like it, turning the wheel, turning the will, turning the effort, going past the place of obscurity and turning, grasping the will and turning the wheel. And what comes up for me in regard to this is taking refuge. Taking refuge in the three treasures of Buddha, Dharma, and Sangha. Reading this, I can feel his brightness coming through, and I find it very helpful to read the Dharma. And then also going to refuge, to your own Buddha nature, and to asking for help. Whatever you feel is helpful to ask for. I usually call on Avalokiteshvara, sometimes to the Buddhas and ancestors. But the willingness to call out and ask for help really helps us. Some people don't do this, but it really helps me anyway. And then taking refuge in the Sangha. Just being around people who are training. Sometimes when you're grumpy, somebody else is bright. And sometimes when they're grumpy, you're bright. So we all help each other. And then going to other people for help, for guidance. So all of these, the three refuges are really helpful. The third diamond point is faith, and this has been coming up for me along with this talk, is faith is not the belief in particular things. It is rather active willingness and the activity of continuing on. Faith flows. It is not about accepting particular ideas, views, or doctrines. It is about trusting the teaching of the Buddha and applying it to one's actual daily life, applying it to what is actually in front of oneself. By so practicing faith, one is, as it were, holding up a light to be seen by others. This is very much the essence of the monastic life, to hold up the light through one's own training, which is the only way it can be held up, and thus to benefit the world. This is the primary aspect of teaching, and if it is not present, then teaching through words will not be of any use. Truly practicing faith means to dig down deep inside of ourselves and really apply ourselves. So, the willingness to look within, to really look at ourselves and see what's obscuring the brightness. The fourth diamond point is the flexibility, resonance, flowing of meditation. Do not think that meditation is some state of mind. If you do so, you will be constantly pulling and pushing your mind in order to make it conform to some sort of deluded ideal. Meditation is the flow of the real, true, profound Buddha nature. It exists. we can know it, and thus know our real life, the life beyond karma. I like that, the life beyond karma. The real life, to sit still, to sit down, to let be, to stop conjuring the mind, to stop conjuring the smoke of the ideas and opinions and views, and having to have it this way and not liking it that way. The disease of the mind, the feverish mind, the blessedness of meditation, the wondrous opportunity which many people do not have, to be able to take some time and just sit and just be. The power of this. When we meditate, we drink the water of the Spirit. We absorb it into ourselves. We pour it over ourselves. There is nothing more wondrous than this. The fifth diamond point is the knowledge of the unborn, the knowledge, the experience of the unborn living within oneself, the true life living within oneself, the true flame, the true light. This is not a theory. We are not doing an experiment. The ancestors have continually practiced, exemplified, taught, explained, pointed to, shown this. It is not beyond our capabilities. The pillar exists within us. We just need to sit within it, abandoning all the unnecessary, abandoning all the wastes of time. If you can do this, you can live in this, in the middle of joy and sorrow, in the middle of aches and pains, in the middle of bantering and silence. May you come to understand this. I pray that you may come to understand this. It's kind of hard to go on after that. What can you say? But I'm going to. Nevertheless. These are also, I'm just going to mention some of the things that have come up for me because you may find them helpful or not. What I also find important in being bright-minded is not judging oneself. It's hard, maybe impossible, to be bright-minded when we judge ourselves. I mean, think about it. And also others as well. If we judge others, we're breaking the precepts, and it's hard to be bright-minded when we're breaking the precepts. This covers up the Buddha nature. So we all make mistakes in our training, sometimes small ones, sometimes large ones. And we just have to keep working on ourselves and going on with kindness and compassion towards ourselves. We need to turn the stream of compassion within, because that is the true reality. Compassion is the true reality. All these judgments and critical mind and all that is just stuff. So also, I'm not going to go into any explanation of these things, but I will just mention them because they came up. All acceptance, not sinking into old habitual ways of responding, working on the bodhisattva vow, generosity and kindness. The bodhisattva vows take us out of our selfish selves and into the bigger picture. And letting go of selfishness is what brings us happiness and true peace. And it can be a very gradual process, and we do change. We find the end of suffering through our willingness to be with the suffering when it arises, without acting on it, and by making changes in our lives that we need to make. Okay, I'll say this anyway. It has been said that our training is going against the ways of the world. We may reach a point where it's so difficult that we just want to say, phooey, why bother? And yet what choice do we have but to go on in the difficulties and continually make the effort not to see them for all that there is? What does it mean to look up? It means to trust, to look within, to not turn away. keep up your meditation. Continue to let go and trust. Let go of attachments. It's a tall order, isn't it? So I think that's it. Thank you. Homage to the Buddha, homage to the Dharma, homage to the Sangha.